The first time 7-year-old Leo picked the wrong door, 18 people died. The second time, he let a warship burn. By the fifth time, the galaxy had learned to fear the human child who couldn't seem to pick the right future. Until the day his worst mistake turned out to be the only thing that kept the universe from ending. The Xylanthi Confederation had cataloged over 4,000 sentient species in their 12-million-year history. They had witnessed the birth of stars and the death of empires. They had seen civilizations rise from mud huts to quantum transcendence in the span of a few thousand cycles. Nothing surprised them anymore, or so they believed, until the human child arrived. His name was Leonardo Maria Santos, but everyone called him Leo. He was 7 standard years old, had a gap where his left front tooth used to be, and possessed the singularly unremarkable talent of being wrong about absolutely everything that was going to happen next. The Xylanthi had discovered Earth 3 years prior to Leo's birth. Their initial assessment had been characteristically thorough and characteristically dismissive. Humans, carbon-based bilaterians, class, 4 civilization, pre-FTL, pre-quantum, barely post-digital. Average lifespan, 80 years. Problem-solving methodology, trial and error with a concerning amount of error. Emotional regulation, inconsistent at best. Galactic potential, negligible. Ambassador Vex, the Xylanthi of the 7th observation cast, had written the initial report himself. He had described humans as energetic but unfocused, capable of remarkable creativity, but crippled by emotional volatility and an almost comical inability to cooperate on large scales. He had recommended the standard protectorate integration track, minimum contact, cultural preservation status, no voting rights on the council for at least 500 years. The council had agreed. Humans were interesting in the way that a particularly resilient mold might be interesting, but they were not, by any stretch of the imagination, a species to watch. Then, the child started screaming. It happened during the second round of integration negotiations, held aboard the Xylanthi flagship Path of Eternity. Leo's mother, Dr. Elena Santos, was the lead human diplomat, a position she had been entirely unqualified for and had only accepted because everyone else with better qualifications had refused. She had brought Leo along because there was no one else to watch him, and because he had a habit of setting things on fire when left alone. The negotiation was going poorly. Ambassador Vex had just finished explaining, with his characteristic blend of clinical precision and condescension, that humanity would be permitted to retain its planetary government, but would have no say in galactic policy for the foreseeable future. The human delegation was grim-faced, but resigned. They had no leverage, no military power, no technology the Xylanthi didn't already possess in vastly superior form. They were, for all practical purposes, accepting terms of surrender, dressed up as partnership. Leo, who had been drawing pictures of spaceships in the corner of the diplomatic chamber, suddenly stopped moving. Then he started screaming. Not the attention-seeking wail of a bored child, but something else. Something that made the fur on the Xylanthi delegation's sensory crests stand on end. It was a sound of pure, unfiltered terror, the kind of scream that comes from someone who has seen something they were never meant to see. "Don't go in there," Leo shrieked, pointing at the main airlock. There's fire and screaming and don't go that way." Ambassador Vex had been in the middle of a sentence. He stopped, his 4 eyes blinking in sequence, a sign of deep confusion in Xylanthi body language. What is the meaning of this interruption? Dr. Santos was already crossing the room, her face pale. "I'm sorry, he has episodes. He doesn't, Leo. Honey, what's wrong?" But Leo wasn't looking at his mother. He was looking at the Xylanthi security chief, a massive specimen named Terran, who had been about to lead a delegation to inspect the docking bay. "You're going to die," Leo said, suddenly, calm in that unnerving way children sometimes have. "All of you. If you go through that door in the next 3 minutes, you're going to die." Terran's crest flared with irritation. The child is obviously disturbed. I recommend removing him from the explosion came from the docking bay. 18 Xylanthe officers had been in the corridor leading to the main airlock. The blast had been targeted, precise, designed to kill without damaging the ship's structural integrity. The investigation later revealed that a radical faction within the Confederation had planted the device, hoping to derail the negotiations by assassinating key personnel. Terran and his team would have been walking directly through the kill zone at the exact moment of detonation. They had stopped because a 7-year-old human child had started screaming. Ambassador Vex had spent the next several hours in a state of cognitive dissonance that bordered on physical pain. He had been wrong. The child had been right. But that was impossible. Xylanthe predictive algorithms, which are the most sophisticated in the known galaxy, had detected no threat. The child had no access to intelligence, no training, no obvious means of knowing what was about to happen. And yet he had known. The subsequent interviews were even more disturbing. Dr. Santos explained, with the exhausted resignation of someone who has had this conversation many times before, that Leo had always been like this. He had predicted the car accident that killed his father when he was 3, had described it in vivid detail 2 hours before it happened, right down to the color of the truck that would hit them. He had predicted the earthquake that destroyed their neighborhood when he was 5. He had predicted a dozen smaller tragedies, each one with the same horrifying accuracy. Can he control it? Vex had asked. Dr. Santos had laughed, and it wasn't a happy sound. Control? He can barely understand it. He sees things, futures, possibilities, but he doesn't know which one is real until it happens. Most of the time, he's wrong. Most of the time, he picks the wrong door, the wrong path, the wrong prediction. But sometimes he was right. And when he was right, people lived. The Xylanthe had, of course, classified the child immediately. A being who could see the future, even imperfectly, was a resource of incalculable value. They had offered Dr. Santos a position on their research vessel, the Seeker of Truth, with the explicit understanding that Leo would be studied. The alternative, left unspoken but clearly implied, was less pleasant. Dr. Santos had accepted. She didn't have a choice. The Seeker of Truth was a marvel of Xylanthe engineering, a research vessel the size of a small moon, crewed by the finest scientific mind from a dozen species, all dedicated to the pursuit of knowledge. Leo had been given a suite of rooms on the observation deck, with windows that looked out at the swirling clouds of the Amethyst Nebula. He had been provided with toys, educational programs, and a team of specialists whose job was to document every word he said, every expression he made, every flicker of his extraordinary mind. He was miserable. "They don't talk to me," he told his mother one night, his small face pressed against the observation window. "They just watch, like I'm a bug under a magnifying glass." Dr. Santos sat down beside him, her reflection ghostly in the glass. "I know, baby. I know. Why can't we go home?" She didn't have an answer for that. Home was a planet under Xylanthe protection now, which meant it was a planet under Xylanthe control. She could go back any time she wanted. But Leo couldn't. The Xylanthe had made that very clear. The research team's findings were published in a classified report 3 months into the voyage. The title was Clinical: Analysis of Anomalous Precognitive Capabilities in Human Juvenile Subject 734 Alpha. The conclusion was anything but Leo's predictions. The report concluded were not predictions at all. He was not seeing the future. He was seeing futures, a branching tree of possibilities, each one as real as the next, each one fighting for dominance in the chaotic quantum foam of unresolved probability. Most beings, even those with limited precognitive abilities, could sense the most probable branch. It was a survival mechanism, honed by evolution across millions of years. Leo couldn't sense the most probable branch. He sensed all of them with equal clarity, and his brain, his small, fragile, human brain, could not distinguish between them. Every possible future was equally real to him. The future where he opened the wrong door and walked into a fire. The future where he opened the right door and lived. The future where he never got out of bed at all. Most of the time, he chose wrong because most futures were wrong. The universe was a place of infinite possibility, and the path that actually happened was just one thread in an endless tapestry. Leo had no way of knowing which thread was real until it snapped into focus around him. But here was the terrifying part. When he did choose right, it wasn't luck. It was something far stranger. The report suggested, in carefully hedged academic language, that Leo's brain might be doing something no other known species could do. It might be collapsing probability waveforms, not predicting the future, but choosing it. When Leo screamed about the bomb on the path of eternity, he wasn't seeing an explosion that was going to happen. He was seeing an explosion that might happen, and his terror, his certainty, his absolute conviction was enough to make it real. Or rather, to make it not real. Because Thran and his team had stopped. They had stopped because Leo had screamed. And because they had stopped, the bomb had detonated in an empty corridor. The future where they walked through that door at that exact moment had been a possibility, a probability, a near certainty, and then it had been nothing at all. The child wasn't predicting the future. He was editing it. Ambassador Vex read the report 3 times, each time with growing unease. He had spent 12,000 years studying the galaxy species, and he had never encountered anything like this. The implications were staggering. If the child could collapse probability at will, if he could reach into the quantum foam and twist it into new shapes, then he was not a resource. He was a weapon, the most powerful weapon in the known universe. And he was 7 years old. Vex had requested an emergency meeting with the council. The request was still pending when the crisis began. It started with the YLL. The YLL were a species the Xylanthi had encountered early in their history, back when the Confederation was still young and foolish. They were energy beings composed of pure quantum flux, and they existed in a state of superposition that made them effectively immortal. They had no physical form, no homeworld, no discernible society, at least not one that the Xylanthi could understand. The Xylanthi had tried to communicate with the YLL for millennia. They had failed. The YLL seemed to exist in a different temporal framework, moving forward and backward through time with equal ease, appearing and disappearing at random intervals. Most Xylanthi scientists believed the YLL were not even aware of the Confederation's existence. They were like cosmic background radiation, present but not interactive. They were wrong. The YLL were very aware, and they were not pleased. The first sign of trouble came when the star at the heart of the Xylanthi home system began to flicker. Not the gradual dimming of a natural cycle, but something else, a rhythmic pulsing like a heartbeat, like a warning. The Confederation's finest astrophysicists were baffled. Stars did not behave this way. There was no known mechanism, no plausible explanation, no precedent in the entire history of stellar observation. Then, the messages started. They came through every channel simultaneously. Comms arrays, quantum entanglement nodes, even the neural implants of sleeping Xylanthi citizens. They were not words, not symbols, not anything the Confederation's linguists could parse. They were patterns, mathematical sequences, prime numbers, Fibonacci spirals, Mandelbrot sets, the universal language of mathematics, written in the flickering of a dying star. And the message, once decoded, was simple. Stop. The Xylanthi had no idea what they were supposed to stop. They sent back their own message, asking for clarification, for context, for anything that might help them understand. The star flickered faster. The patterns became more urgent, more desperate. Stop, or we will unmake you. The council convened an emergency session. Theories abounded. Perhaps the YLL objected to some experimental procedure, some new technology, some violation of cosmic law. Perhaps the Confederation had crossed a boundary without knowing it, had trespassed on territory that belonged to beings beyond their comprehension. Perhaps the seeker of truth exploded, not from external attack, not from malfunction. It simply ceased to be a cohesive object. Every atom of the ship, every molecule, every quantum particle decided at the same moment to go somewhere else. The ship unfolded like a flower made of light, then scattered itself across a volume of space the size of a small solar system. 4,382 beings, representing 17 different species, died instantly, including Dr. Elena Santos. Leo survived. He was found drifting in an emergency pod 3 days later, his small body curled into a ball, his face blank with shock. He had not eaten. He had not slept. He had simply stared at the wall of the pod, his lips moving soundlessly, as if he were having a conversation with someone who wasn't there. The rescue team brought him aboard the path of eternity, where Ambassador Vex was waiting. The child looked even smaller than Vex remembered, even more fragile. His eyes were red-rimmed, his cheeks hollow, his hands trembling. "She's gone," Leo said, before Vex could speak. "I saw it. I saw all of it. There was a future where she lived, but I couldn't find it. There were too many. They were all screaming." Vex's sensory crests flattened against his skull, a gesture of distress in Xylanthe body language. "The YLL. Do you know what they want?" Leo looked up at him, and, for a moment, Vex saw something ancient in the child's eyes. Something old and tired and impossibly sad. "They want us to stop looking at them," Leo said. "Every time we observe them, we change them. We force them into a state they don't want to be in. They've been trying to tell us for millions of years, but we couldn't hear. We were too busy watching." Vex felt cold spread through his thoracic cavity. The YLL existed in superposition. Every observation collapsed their waveform, forced them into a single state, a single reality. The Confederation's efforts to study them, their telescopes, their scanners, their desperate attempts to understand, had been torturing the YLL for millennia without ever realizing it. And now the YLL had had enough. "The star," Leo continued. "It's not a warning. It's a countdown. When it stops flickering, they're going to unmake everything. Not just us. Everything. Every star, every planet, every possibility. They're going to collapse the whole universe into a single point, and then they're going to let it go, and they're going to hope that the next one doesn't have observers in it. Can we stop them?" Vex asked. Leo was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was very small. "I don't know. There are so many futures. In most of them, we lose. In some of them, we don't even try. But there's one where we win. And it's the stupidest one. It makes no sense. Every time I look at it, I think I'm wrong. It's so obviously wrong. What is it?" Vex asked. Leo met his eyes. "It's the one where you listen to me, even when I'm wrong. Especially when I'm wrong." The Xylanthe did not listen to children. This was not a matter of cruelty or arrogance. It was simply not how their society functioned. Xylanthe children were cared for, educated, protected from harm, but they were not consulted on matters of galactic importance. Their brains were not fully developed. Their judgment was compromised by emotion. Their understanding of the universe was, by definition, incomplete. And yet, Vex found himself in the impossible position of advocating for a 7-year-old human child in front of the full Confederation Council. The council chamber was a vast sphere of polished obsidian, with seating for 5,000 representatives arranged in concentric rings. At the center, floating in a field of contained anti-gravity, was the Council Presidium, 12 ancient Xylanthe whose combined age exceeded the lifespan of most civilizations. Vex had served the Confederation for 12,000 years. He had never been more terrified. "You're asking us to base our response to an existential threat on the random utterances of a child," said Presidium member Thrall, her voice flat with disbelief. "A human child, from a class, for civilization that hasn't even mastered interstellar travel. The child has demonstrated precognitive abilities. The child has demonstrated statistical anomalies," Thrall interrupted. "He was right about the bomb. He's been wrong about everything else. According to your own reports, the subject's accuracy rate is approximately 12%. That is worse than random chance. That is meaningfully worse than random chance." Vex wanted to argue, but he couldn't. The numbers were correct. Leo's predictions were wrong far more often than they were right. He saw futures that never came to pass, warned about dangers that never materialized, insisted on courses of action that led nowhere good. The research team had documented hundreds of his predictions over the past 3 months. The vast majority had been false. But he was right about the YLL, Vex said. He described their nature before we had any data. He explained their motivation before we understood the pattern in their communications. He made a lucky guess, Thrall said, or he repeated something he overheard, or his mother told him what to say. We have no evidence that the child's statements about the YLL came from any special ability, and considerable evidence that his abilities, such as they are unreliable to the point of uselessness. The other Presidium members murmured in agreement. Vex felt his hope crumbling. They weren't going to listen. They were going to do what Xylanthe always did: analyze, calculate, optimize. They were going to find the most probable path forward and take it, and they were going to die. With respect, Vex said, trying one last time, what if the child's accuracy rate is low because he's seeing futures that should be probable but aren't? What if he's not predicting what will happen, but what could happen? What if his value isn't in being right? It's in showing us the paths we would never consider. Thrall's eyes blinked in sequence. Once, twice, 3 times. That is not how probability works, Ambassador. Maybe it's how human probability works. The chamber fell silent. Vex had never spoken to the Presidium with such informality, such raw conviction. He could feel the weight of 5,000 stares on his carapace. Then, from the back of the chamber, a voice spoke. It was small, thin, and unmistakably human. They're going to do it tomorrow. Leo had somehow slipped past the security cordon. He stood at the edge of the observer gallery, his hands gripping the railing, his face pale but determined. He was wearing a Xylanthe emergency suit that was at least 3 sizes too big, and his hair was sticking up in 12 different directions. The star has 3 pulses left, he said. 1 for the council's decision, 1 for the preparation, 1 for the end. You have until the 3rd pulse to change their minds, and you're not going to do it by arguing about probability. Thrall's crest flared with anger. How did this child get in here? Security, don't bother, Leo said. I already saw the future where you throw me out. It doesn't help. The YLL don't care if I'm in the room or not. They're not listening to me. They're listening to you. All of you. Every observer in the galaxy. Every being that's ever looked at them and thought, what are you? That's what's killing them. Not weapons. Not war. Attention. He took a step forward, and the Xylanthe guards who had been rushing toward him stopped. There was something in the child's voice now. Not a 7-year-old's voice, but something older. Something that had seen too many futures and survived too many wrong choices. You want to know why I'm always wrong? Leo said, it's because I'm looking at the futures where everyone lives. Those are the ones I want. Those are the ones I reach for. And most of the time, they're not real. Most of the time, the universe wants something else. But I keep reaching anyway. Because if I stop, if I accept the most probable future, the one where we all lose, then that future becomes real. And I can't let that happen. He looked directly at Thrall, and for a moment, the ancient Xylanthe seemed to flinch. You've been looking at the most probable future your whole life, Leo said. That's why you're going to lose. Because the most probable future is the one where you do nothing, and the YLL destroy everything, and the universe starts over without any observers in it. That's the easy future. That's the one that requires no effort, no risk, no faith. That's the one your probability algorithms keep showing you. But there's another future. It's not probable. It's not even possible, according to your math. But it's there. I can see it. And in that future, you do something stupid. You take a risk that makes no sense. You trust a child who's wrong about almost everything. He smiled, and it was the saddest smile Vex had ever seen. That's the future where everyone lives. The council deliberated for 7 hours. The star flickered twice more during that time. Once at the beginning, once in the middle. 1 pulse left. When they emerged, Vex could read the decision on their faces before they spoke. They had chosen the probable path. They had optimized. They had calculated. They had decided to evacuate. The plan was straightforward. Move as many Xylanthi as possible to the outer rim of the galaxy, where the YLL's influence was weakest. Abandon the home systems, the colony worlds, the historical sites. Preserve the species at the cost of everything else. It was a sensible plan. It was a logical plan. It was the plan that gave the Xylanthi the highest probability of survival. It was also, Leo told Vex privately, the plan that got everyone killed. The YLL aren't attacking your planets, Leo said. They were sitting in Vex quarters, which were Spartan even by Xylanthi standards. Leo had wrapped himself in a thermal blanket and was clutching a stuffed animal, a small, threadbare rabbit that had somehow survived the destruction of the Seeker of Truth. They're attacking your observations. Every time you look at them, you hurt them. Every time you run a scan, every time you calculate a trajectory, every time you think about them. It's not about where you are. It's about what you're doing. Then, what do you suggest? Vex asked. He was exhausted, his cognitive functions running on emergency reserves. We stop observing? We blind ourselves. We stop trying to understand, Leo said. That's what they want. They don't want to be understood. They want to be left alone. They want to exist in all their possible states without anyone forcing them to pick one. And the only way to give them that, he trailed off. The only way to give them that is to forget they exist, Vex finished. To erase all records. To never speak of them again. To pretend they were never there. Leo nodded. And that's the stupid part. Because you can't do that. Your whole civilization is built on knowledge. On understanding. On observing and recording and analyzing. Asking you to forget is like asking you to stop breathing. Then, why did you say it was the future where everyone lives? Because it's not about you, Leo said. It's about me. He pulled the blanket tighter around his shoulders. Outside the viewport, the star flickered for the third time. One pulse left. I've been wrong about everything, Leo said. My whole life. I see a future where I turn left, so I turn right, and then I find out I should have turned left. I see a future where I stay quiet, so I speak up, and then I find out I should have stayed quiet. I'm always reaching for the best future, and I always miss. Every time. Except the bomb, Vex said. Except the bomb. That one time, I reached for the wrong future on purpose. I looked at the future where everyone walked through that door and died, and I thought that's the one I want. Because it was the only one where I could do something. The only one where my screaming could change things. He looked up at Vex, and there were tears in his eyes. I've been thinking about that. About why I was right that one time. And I think it's because I wasn't trying to be right. I was trying to be wrong. I was trying to pick the future that made no sense. The one that everyone else would have ignored. The one that was so obviously bad that no one would ever choose it. And that's the one that saved people. So you're saying, Vex started. I'm saying that maybe being wrong is the point, Leo said. Maybe the universe doesn't need someone who can see the right future. Maybe it needs someone who's willing to look at all the wrong ones, to stare into the darkness, and say this one, this terrible, impossible, stupid one, this is the one I choose. Because the right future is already taken. It's the one that happens when no one does anything special. The wrong futures, the ones that make no sense, the ones that require faith and risk and stupidity. Those are the ones where miracles happen. The star flickered again. The third pulse had begun. They're waiting for your answer, Leo said. The YLL. They know what the council decided. They know about the evacuation. They're going to let you try. And then they're going to show you why it won't work. Vex stood up. His body was heavy with exhaustion, but his mind was clearer than it had been in centuries. What do I tell them? He asked. Leo smiled. It was a small smile, fragile, but genuine. Tell them I was wrong, he said. Tell them the child made another mistake. Tell them the evacuation is a trap, and the only way out is to do the one thing that makes absolutely no sense. And what's that? Send me to talk to them. Vex stared. You? A human child? You want to negotiate with beings that just destroyed a ship full of 4,000 people? No, Leo said. I don't want to negotiate. I want to apologize. on behalf of every observer in the galaxy. I want to look at them, really look at them one last time, and say I'm sorry. And then I want to close my eyes and never open them again. Vex's crest flattened against his skull. You're talking about blinding yourself. Permanently. I'm talking about choosing a future, Leo said. A wrong one. The wrongest one I can find. The one where the galaxy survives because a stupid human child made a stupid choice that everyone told him not to make. He stood up, dropping the blanket. The stuffed rabbit fell to the floor. He didn't pick it up. I've been wrong about everything my whole life, he said. Let me be wrong about this. You know how you close your eyes and you can still see the light through your eyelids? It's like that. The YLL are the light, and the only way to reach them is to stop seeing. The Xylanthi had spent 12 million years developing technologies to see more clearly, to observe more precisely, to understand more completely. The idea of deliberately blinding themselves was not just counterintuitive, it was culturally impossible. It went against everything they were, everything they valued, everything they had built. And yet, Vex had presented Leo's proposal to the council. He had expected ridicule, dismissal, perhaps even arrest. What he had not expected was silence. The 5,000 representatives had sat in perfect stillness, their 4 eyes fixed on the small human child who stood at the center of the chamber, waiting. For all I've been the first to speak. You understand that this will likely kill you. Leo had nodded. Most of the futures where I try, I die. But there's one where I don't. And that's enough. Why? For all I'd asked. Why would you sacrifice yourself for a species that isn't your own on behalf of a civilization that has treated you as a specimen rather than a person? Leo had thought about it for a long time. When he answered, his voice was steady. Because my mom believed in you, he said. She thought you were worth saving. Even when you put us in a cage and studied us like animals, she said, they're just scared, Leo. They've been alone for so long they forgot how to trust. She was wrong about a lot of things. But she wasn't wrong about that. He had looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of as many representatives as he could. You're not bad, he had said. You're just afraid. And I get that. I'm afraid too. I've been afraid my whole life. But I've also been wrong my whole life, and that's taught me something. It's taught me that being wrong isn't the end of the world. It's just the beginning of a different one. The council had voted. The margin had been narrow, 2,942 in favor, 2,058 opposed. But it had been enough. The Xylanthi would do something stupid. They would trust a child who was wrong about almost everything. They would bet the future of the galaxy on a 7-year-old human's ability to choose the wrong future one more time. The chamber they prepared for Leo was a perfect sphere, its walls lined with a material that absorbed all electromagnetic radiation. No light entered. No sound penetrated. No heat escaped. It was, for all practical purposes, a hole in reality, a space where observation was impossible because there was nothing to observe. Leo stood at the center of the sphere, alone. Vex watched from the control room, his sensory crest pressed flat against his skull in an agony of anticipation. Are you ready? Vex asked through the comm link. Leo's voice came back small and steady. No, but that's okay. Being ready is overrated. Now, I want you to know that whatever happens, the Confederation will remember you. You will not be forgotten. Actually, Leo said, that's exactly what I need you to do. Forget me. Forget all of this. The YLL can't unmake a universe that no one is watching. They need observers to collapse their waveform. If there's no one left to observe. He trailed off. Vex waited. If I do this right, Leo continued, you won't remember the YLL. You won't remember me. You won't remember any of this. The memories will just fade, like they were never there. And that's how you'll know it worked. But I don't want to forget you, Vex said. The words came out raw, more emotional than he had intended. 12,000 years of diplomatic training, and a human child had reduced him to this. Leo laughed. It was a small sound, barely audible through the comm link, but it was the first genuine laugh Vex had heard from him since his mother died. That's the point, Leo said. The wrong future is the one where you remember. The right future, the probable one, the easy one, the one where everyone dies, that's the one where you hold on. Let go, Vex. Let me be wrong. Let me be forgotten. Let me save you in the only way that works. The lights in the chamber dimmed. The absorption field activated. Vex could no longer see Leo, could no longer hear him, could no longer sense him at all. The child had become a ghost, a possibility, a future that might or might not exist. And then the screaming started. It wasn't Leo's voice. Not exactly. It was something else, something that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was the sound of a universe being unmade and remade, of probabilities collapsing and expanding, of futures dying and being born. It was the sound of the YLL finally, blessedly being seen for what they were. And then it stopped. Vex blinked. He was standing in the control room of the Path of Eternity, but he couldn't remember why. He looked around, confused. There was something he was supposed to be doing, something important, but the thought slipped away every time he reached for it. He checked the ship's logs. The most recent entry was from 3 days ago, discussing routine maintenance schedules. Nothing about a crisis. Nothing about a child. Nothing about beings made of pure quantum flux who wanted to unmake reality. He frowned. There was a gap in his memory, hours, maybe days, that he simply couldn't account for. But when he tried to focus on it, his head began to ache, and the thoughts scattered like startled birds. He decided to go get some rest. He was probably just tired. On the observation deck of the Path of Eternity, in a room that no one remembered existed, a small boy lay on the floor. His eyes were closed. His chest rose and fell with the steady rhythm of deep sleep. Clutched in his right hand was a stuffed rabbit, threadbare and worn, its glass eyes reflecting the light from a star that no longer flickered. He was dreaming. In his dream, he was walking through a forest made of light. The trees were probabilities, the leaves were possibilities, and the ground beneath his feet was the accumulated weight of every future that had ever been chosen. He walked for a long time, and eventually, he came to a clearing. In the center of the clearing stood a being made of starlight and shadow. It had no fixed form, no recognizable features, no voice that could be heard with ears. But Leo understood anyway. Why? The being asked. Why did you choose this? Leo sat down on the ground, cross-legged, and looked up at the being with eyes that had seen too much and were finally, blessedly closed. Because it was the wrong choice, he said. And the wrong choices are the only ones that matter. The being pulsed with something that might have been confusion. Explain. Everyone always tries to make the right choice. The smart choice. The choice that makes sense. But the right choices don't change anything. They just keep things moving along the same old paths. The wrong choices, the ones that make no sense, the ones that everyone tells you not to make. Those are the ones that create new futures. Those are the ones that save people. You save beings who will not remember you. I know. You sacrificed yourself for a future you will never see. I know. You were wrong about almost everything you ever predicted. And yet you kept predicting, kept reaching, kept choosing. Leo smiled. That's what humans do. We're wrong a lot. But we don't stop. We can't stop. Because every time we're wrong, we learn something. Every time we fail, we get a little bit closer to getting it right. And eventually, maybe after a million wrong choices, we stumble into something beautiful. The being was quiet for a long time. The forest of light swayed around them, possibilities blooming and dying like flowers in fast forward. We have decided, the YLL said finally. We will not unmake your universe. Leo's heart leaped. Really, on one condition. You must continue to be wrong. You must continue to reach for impossible futures, to choose paths that make no sense, to fail and fail and fail again. Your wrongness is precious to us. It creates possibilities we had not imagined. It expands the tree of probability in ways our own observations never could. So you want me to keep making mistakes? We want you to keep being human. Leo laughed. It was the best sound he had ever heard. I think I can do that, he said. We know, the YLL said. We have seen the futures where you don't. They are very small, very quiet, very empty. We prefer this one. The being began to fade, its light dimming as it retreated back into the quantum foam. But before it disappeared completely, it paused. "One more thing, child. You asked why we were angry, why we wanted to destroy everything. The answer is simple. We were lonely. We existed for eons in superposition, never observed, never known, never loved. And then the observers came, and they looked at us and they tried to understand us, and we realized we had been waiting for that. All along, we had been waiting to be seen. You saw us, child, not with your eyes, with your wrongness, with your willingness to choose the impossible. You saw us as we truly are, not threats, not mysteries, not problems to be solved. Just beings, just lonely beings who wanted someone to notice. Thank you." And then the YLO was gone. Leo opened his eyes. He was lying on the floor of a room he didn't recognize, clutching a stuffed rabbit that smelled like smoke and starlight. He sat up slowly, his head spinning, his stomach growling with hunger. He had no idea where he was or how he had gotten there. He looked around. The room was bare except for a single window that looked out at a sea of stars. Somewhere out there, he knew was Earth. Somewhere out, there was his mother, waiting for him to come home. He couldn't remember her face. He couldn't remember her voice. He couldn't remember why he knew she was waiting. But he knew she loved him. He knew that much. Some things you don't need to remember. Some things you just feel in your bones, in your heart, in the wrong choices that somehow turn out right. He stood up, brushed off his too big emergency suit, and walked to the door. It opened automatically, revealing a long corridor lined with windows. At the end of the corridor stood a tall, insectoid being with 4 eyes and a crest of sensory tendrils. The being looked at Leo. Leo looked back. "I'm sorry," Leo said. "I don't remember your name." The being's crest rippled in a gesture that might have been sadness or relief or something in between. "That's all right," it said. "I don't remember yours either." They stood there for a moment, two strangers in a corridor, connected by something they had both lost and couldn't name. "Do you want to get something to eat?" the being asked. Leo's stomach growled in response. "I'll take that as a yes," the being said. They walked together toward the mess hall, their footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. Neither of them knew why they felt so comfortable in each other's presence. Neither of them knew why they trusted each other so completely. Neither of them knew why they both felt, deep in their hearts, that they had saved the universe together. But they didn't need to know. Some things you don't need to understand. Some things you just feel. And somewhere in the spaces between possibilities, the YLL watched the small human child walk down a corridor toward a meal he wouldn't remember eating, toward a future he couldn't predict, toward a life of being wrong about almost everything. And they smiled. Not because the child would ever be right, but because he would never stop trying. And that they had finally learned was the only future that mattered. 300 years later, the Xylanthi Confederation received a transmission from a newly discovered species on the outer rim of the galaxy. The species called themselves humans, and they had just achieved faster-than-light travel for the first time. They were eager to meet their neighbors, to learn from older civilizations, to find their place in the galactic community. Ambassador Vex, who had aged gracefully into one of the oldest living Xylanthi, was assigned to make first contact. He had no memory of ever meeting a human before. He had no reason to feel anything but professional curiosity about the new species. But when he saw them, when he saw their small, soft bodies, their unpredictable emotions, their baffling tendency to make choices that made no logical sense, something stirred in the depths of his memory. Something warm, something sad, something that felt like a child's laugh and a stuffed rabbit and a wrong choice that had somehow saved everything. He didn't remember, but he felt. And when the human delegation arrived, led by a young woman with a gap between her front teeth and a nervous habit of predicting disaster, Vex found himself smiling. "Welcome," he said. "We've been expecting you." The young woman tilted her head, confused. "You have? But we just sent the transmission yesterday. How could you possibly?" Vex held up a hand. "I don't know," he said. "I just felt it, in my bones, that you were coming, that you would be here, that you would be exactly who you are." The young woman's eyes widened. That's weird, she said. I have that feeling too. Like I've been here before. Like I know you. Like we've already had this conversation. Maybe we have, Vex said. In a different future. A wrong one. The one where we didn't make it. The young woman didn't understand what he meant. Neither did Vex, not really. But they both felt it, the weight of a future that had been chosen and lost, and chosen again, the echo of a sacrifice that no one remembered, the quiet miracle of a universe that had been saved by a child who was wrong about everything. And somewhere in the spaces between possibilities, a small boy with a stuffed rabbit smiled in his sleep and dreamed of a future where everyone lived. Even him.